Welcome to Extracurricular. I'm your co-host, Eddie Geller.
And I'm your other co-host, Stephanie Vanos, school board member for Orange County Public Schools, but I am here unofficially, as I always am.
Well, we're always happy to have you, we being the royal we. I feel like that my intro was especially newscaster-esque that last time. And it's always a work in progress.
True.
Like life is a work in progress. Would you say that?
Life is a journey, not a destination.
There you go. That sounds like something a runner would say. Welcome to the podcast. If you haven't been to the podcast before, please do consider subscribing, rating us. Steph, what should they rate us?
5 stars only.
I need to get better at talking, which is funny because we have a podcast. Also, check out our Instagram, extracurricular_podcast, and you can email us at podcastextracurricular@gmail.com. Phew, I'm struggling here. What's going on with me, Steph?
I think because it's late night. Usually we record in the late morning or the afternoon, but this is an after dinner record. It's different.
This is a wild time.
We're done. We're done.
We're done. No, we're gonna bring it. Well, we had a fabulous guest who, thankfully, we recorded during the daytime hours. We had a wonderful guest, Lutz Fernandez. Anne is a former teacher. She's also the author of 2 books, Carjack, The Culture of the Automobile and Its Effect on Our Lives, and more germane to our conversation, Schooled, Ordinary, Extraordinary Teaching in an Age of Change. How did you like speaking with Anne?
Oh, it was great. I loved her background. She was in the business world. I think it was an investment broker. Is that the word?
Broker.
Investment banker for several years, and then had another career as a teacher for, I think, around 20 years, and then kind of got into this research and writing. And first of all, kudos to people who just have a career change midlife. I think that's amazing. And to have 2 career changes, amazing. We can always learn new things. So I love that. And it was great just hearing her perspective as a former teacher, and then being able to, and she was a teacher kind of during the age of really the rise of digital, technology in the classroom. And so it was really interesting to hear her perspective.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, because the reason we invited Anne, because I found Anne on Blue Sky, and Anne both posts and reposts a lot of stuff on education. And she created this really great worksheet called Resisting AI Mania. We can link to the worksheet in the notes. And I wanted to invite her on to talk about AI, to talk about EdTech, what is happening with AI's integration into education, and what it means for students, for teachers, for, school boards writ large.
Society.
We didn't really focus on all of the other nefarious aspects of AI, whether that's creative theft or the investment bubble or trying to take over workforces, et cetera, et cetera. We really focused on the educational aspect, but really, there's a lot we could have talked about. But one thing I do want to home in on, we talk a lot about this phrase EdTech in the interview, and obviously, this is a portmanteau of education technology. But when we talk about EdTech, Steph, can you give us a definition? And really, I just wanted to say portmanteau.
Congratulations. No, I mean, when I think of EdTech, it's really it could be any variety of really technological implementations in the classroom. So that could be tablets and laptops. That could be online content delivery, different, software programs for, tracking, reading minutes to, math games to, just really anything where students are on a screen.
Thank you. And this is a timely podcast, I would say. There have been numerous articles, and we're going to talk through it. We talked through it in the interview about what the science says about AI in schools and EdTech, but actually just shared an article that just came out in Fortune. The headline is, "The U.S. spent $30 billion to ditch textbooks for laptops and tablets. The result is the first generation less cognitively capable than their parents." And you can imagine the article just sort of talks about this research of what AI and technology is doing to our youth. And, this is I think we allude to in the interview that there's kind of an awakening about AI, and we're sort of, I think, stepping back from, oh my goodness, look at what it can do, and more like, look at what the ramifications and implications of AI, both society-wide and education. So I'm glad we're waking up to it, but this is still coming hot and heavy, not just in society, but to school boards. You had a conference a few months ago where everything in the conference was about AI. Am I right?
Am I right?
Am I right, people? Portmanteau.
No, actually, it's almost a year ago. Was at
a year ago?
Almost, yeah. It was, a conference in San Diego, and it was just interesting because most education conferences, I would say, are not what's the word, fancy. And this one, you could tell, definitely involved a lot more money. And it was just a very different feel. I learned a lot. It was interesting. And I am always, I'm always interested in learning about things that maybe I don't know a lot about, or maybe I even don't necessarily like, but I still think it's important to know what's out there and to learn about them. So I think there's a lot of value.
Do you want me to tell you more about video games? We can talk a lot about The Legend of Zelda if you want to learn about things you're not interested in.
But I mean, obviously this has to do with schools. And so, it was interesting, but I do think it was timely. I think, as we're seeing more and more research about the negative, implications of technology in the classroom. And I think AI just really expands that and talks a lot about that in the conversation.
Yeah, she was fabulous. It's good to be back. We took a week off. It was mostly a lovely weekend, spent some time with my family. We were thinking about whether we could squeeze in a pod, and then I had a terrible allergic reaction, but I'm here to talk about it. Hazelnuts are no joke.
So tell the listeners what caused your reaction.
Well, I don't want to necessarily out myself for how it all went down, but let me just say that if you're getting that like Godiva chocolates where, there's, a dozen or 2 dozen, just read the back of the thing that tells you which chocolate is which. And it's been about 8 years since I had a severe allergic reaction. So I had a good streak going, but you let your guard down for a minute and boom, a hazelnut takes you down.
Awful. I felt so bad for you. That was my first experience with you having an allergy. It makes me feel like I should not order lattes with almond milk anymore. So we'll see. I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking real hard about it.
Okay, you continue to think. You should have what you enjoy. But while we were gone, we did an episode, I think two episodes ago, that was Ms. Vanos Goes to Tallahassee. You actually went back to Tallahassee. Do you want to just give a quick recap, because it's relevant to a lot of what's happening here in Florida?
Yeah, this last trip was we really focused on the budget. The week that we were there, both the Florida Senate and Florida House dropped their budgets really right as we left, but really focused on the declining enrollment that we kind of unexpectedly saw this year, in large part due to immigration policies at the federal and state level, had a huge impact on Florida students, among, of course, the taxpayer-funded voucher program, as well as declining birth rates, has really contributed a large amount to the decline. But we talked a lot about, how that, school districts will now not see sort of the number of students they were forecasted by the state to see, which means that they may not receive the full amount of money that they had expected to this budget year. And so we talked a lot about, okay, how are we going to keep these districts going? There are some districts that are in the red, like they are not going to be able to make payroll in April. So we talked a lot about that and how, the government how the state can really ensure that these districts have the funding that really they were expecting from last year. And what else? We also, of course, talked about the taxpayer-funded voucher bill in the Senate. Senator Gates proposed a really good, strong bill that really attempts to clean up a lot of the mess that the taxpayer-funded voucher program caused. And so we focused a lot of time on that as well. So, and just a couple of other budget issues. So that's really, budget.
Budget. Also, one other thing I actually do want to talk about, I didn't put it on our outline, so please forgive me. There was another State Board of Education meeting, and there were a lot of things that we talked about. You watched it. I did not watch it, but we talked about it. One thing I do want to bring up is they were really fierce about the student protests that have been happening, bringing attention to what's going on with ICE. Can you talk about that for just a second?
Yeah, I would say they spent a lot of time talking about the teachers union. They are not big fans. A lot of time talking about the teachers union. And then, they talked, of course, about the student walkouts, and they're concerned that students leaving campus, it's so unsafe, they said, for high school students to be in the street around the school unsupervised, which I found interesting given that they don't fund transportation for the streets around the school. You have to live 2 miles away from the school to even get a school bus. And they don't fully fund that. They don't even fund half of that in Orange County. So it was interesting that they talked about how dangerous the streets were, but they're not funding the school buses needed to keep students safe on those streets. So found that interesting. Oh, and they also talked about how important school safety was, and would love to point out at this moment that Orange County Public Schools spends $17 million more than the state allocation for school safety. So they talk about school safety and how important it is, and yet they don't fully fund it. So I just found those two things interesting.
I mean, they also will do anything to get more access to guns and do not take school shootings seriously when we talk about the safety of children. So, and I know that it's not just the State Board of Education, but I'm talking about the, Republican-controlled legislature and executive office here in the state of Florida. And one other thing I want to say is, the State Board of Education and Republicans in this state are really mad about kids protesting and walking out of school. And obviously we had Luell on the show a couple weeks ago. She was so amazing. And I just want to say thank you again to those kids. Bless those kids. If their demonstration, if their activism stops an ICE facility, helps stop an ICE facility from being built, if it saves someone's life to bring attention and to continue to keep the pressure on these thugs, then it's all worth it. And thank goodness that we have an engaged, group of young people who want to take part in democracy and do not want to have this happen on their watch. And from everything we've talked about and everything we've seen, this has mostly happened within, not like non-learning time, happened during lunch. I can't speak for every demonstration, but I'm just so grateful to those kids, and the fact that a lot of folks are so wound up about these demonstrations is a testament to their power, because they wouldn't be making such a big deal and they wouldn't be so angry if it wasn't impactful and meaningful to watch students step out during their lunch periods and say, never again.
I do want to say, you said something about Republicans across the state do not support these ICE protests. And I have to say, I actually think there are a lot of Republicans in this state who don't support ICE. And I don't know if that's necessarily true of those in leadership.
Yeah.
I would probably agree with you, but I think that there are plenty of Republicans who do not support what's happening. And I just think it's important to point that out.
I apologize. Whenever I say Republicans, I mean the Republicans in power in the state.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Just want to clarify.
No. That's important. Okay. That, for being kind of exhausted, which I claim to be.
You got worked up there.
I got worked up. Well, these are times to get worked up. So I feel good about it. All right. But I feel even better about our interview with Lutz Fernandez. So let's go to that. Lutz Fernandez, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to talk to you. You have a varied background, but I found you through Blue Sky posting essentially everything I agree with about education and how fired up you were on all these aspects, but especially AI, which we'll get into in a moment. But could you just kind of tell us a bit about your background, your education background, and what brought you to these issues?
Sure, yeah. I was a second or third career teacher, depending on how you count. So I had worked in marketing, and I'd spent a decade on Wall Street working in mergers before going back to school to teach. and decided to teach English to high school students because I missed people and words. And so that was at the turn of the millennium. And so I spent more than 2 decades teaching in Connecticut public middle and high schools after that. I also have written a few nonfiction books, including one about teachers, where my co-author, who happens to be my sister, who happens to be a world-class anthropologist, and I traveled the country meeting teachers and talking about their challenges and joys. And that really got me started writing a lot of smaller pieces on education, which is what I continue to do, even though my last teaching year was the 2023 to 2024 school year.
I'm just curious, what was that jump like going from the private sector into education?
Oh, it was wonderful. I mean, I was not as well suited for business as I was for teaching, and I did not find it anywhere nearly as satisfying psychically. And so it was a big adjustment in terms of I held some of the misconceptions that a lot of people hold about how much teachers work. Right? So I thought I was leaving this, hard-charging, overworked career for something that was going to be a little milder, and it was just a little milder. It was not a lot milder, as I might have hoped or thought, or most people might think. But it was absolutely the right choice for me. I had a bunch of siblings that were teachers, and they were happy, and I was not. So even though that first year of teaching is painful and difficult, I knew if I stuck it out, I would have a career that I got a lot of satisfaction from, and I did.
I love that. Obviously, teaching, not easy, but very rewarding. Do you miss it?
I do. I do. I'm on my second retirement. So I did get drawn back in. So yes, I do miss it. I miss being with the students. I miss talking about books with teenagers. I love teenagers. They made me laugh every day and taught me something every day. So yeah, I miss it. I miss the joys that come with the stresses. I continue to immerse myself in education news, policy, and politics, and so I just get the angry stuff and the frustrating stuff and the stuff that I wish I could do something about. When you're in the classroom, you're doing something. You're helping students think and learn to read and learn to write and get ready to go out into a big wide world. So absolutely, I miss it.
Yeah. I can really relate to that answer. Sometimes it feels like you're just fighting this uphill battle and everything is doom and gloom sometimes, but then you actually go into a school, and this week happened to be speech and debate week. So I was in schools, judging speech contests and talking with members of the, speech and debate team. And it's just such a good reminder, okay, this is why we're doing it. This is why we're doing everything. And being in schools just makes such a huge difference. So I relate to that so much. One question I have for you is I know, you've done some work just generally writing about sort of EdTech, education technology, and how that has impacted our schools and our classrooms, our students and our teachers. So I think that might be a good place to start. Can you share a little bit about maybe what you saw when you were in the classroom, or sort of what inspired you to take that topic on and dig deep?
Sure. Yeah. And really, a lot of it does have to do with the timing of when I was in the classroom, because I began teaching in 2001 and taught until, as I mentioned, 2024. So I saw a really tremendous amount of change over that time period in terms of how technology was being used in the classroom. When I came in, we had a TV that you rolled out of a closet down the hall that you signed out, on a sheet to take to your room for an hour, and then you brought it back. Tried not to run over anybody with it. You had a overhead transparency projector. You had a blackboard or a whiteboard and something to write with it on, and that was the technology. Yes, Scantrons, and there were other pieces of hardware and things that I guess you could call software that we used, but over the time that I was teaching, I just saw more and more, and a lot of the early stuff, which was improved media technology, was wonderful. Then we got, a computer lab, and we brought our kids in there every once in a while to work on something. Then we got the Chromebooks in the carts that you would sign out. Then we went to one-on-one devices. And by the time I left teaching, the classroom that I walked out of, most students were sitting at a desk with a device open in front of them, or two. Or three,
Yeah.
I guess. Probably some of them. I saw such tremendous change over that time period. And, a lot of it happened in the teens, at least in the districts that I was in terms of, really going to, I had one department head that insisted that we include some kind of new technology in every lesson. And, I was an English teacher. So, technology includes pen and paper to me. It did not to her. She liked a lot of the things like Poll Everywhere and things where students could use their phones in the classroom to enhance their learning. And there was just a real influx and a pressure to start to use more technology. And quite frankly, I did it over time. And then when the pandemic came, I taught during that first full year of the pandemic. I was in the classroom, but I was teaching full in person but hybrid part of the year. And after that year, it was even more so that my instructional methods were so infused with technology that I had to really pull them apart when I went back into that classroom and tried to return to a saner balance of technology.
Do you think that technology did actually enhance student learning? And I ask that because I'm wondering where that pressure that your principal sort of put on teachers, like where that came from. Were you seeing that students were learning much more, much better with the technology? Or, what was the reason for that push?
That's really interesting that you say that, because we really never received any, professional development that included research on the systems that were introduced to us. We received a lot of professional development about how to use something and how we might use it in our classroom, but rarely was that paired with information about its effectiveness. And so each teacher individually is all this time trying to figure out, well, did my students learn something better this way than the way I did it last year? And trying to make those decisions ad hoc, day by day and week by week and unit by unit, year by year. And, what I've since learned as I've immersed myself in this, because once I left and once the AI push became so dominant, I really dug much more deeply into EdTech and what we know about its effectiveness. And what we know about its effectiveness is not much. and I mean that in both ways, which is that the people that are using it don't know much about its effectiveness, and its effectiveness doesn't seem to be very much.
I want to jump in just for a sec to ask Stephanie, what do you feel like, because we've talked about this before, the pressure as a school board member for the district to adopt these technologies? If you could talk about that for a sec, I think that's good context as well.
I was asking because I was hoping that you could give me a good answer, but I feel kind of a lot of the same things. We're a district that we were on pace to have one-to-one devices right about when COVID hit. And this was long before I was on the board, but we were one of those school districts that, really students did have devices. Not everyone in Florida did. I think as a parent, I have seen this push to have technology, and I'll just call it, I'm putting this in quotes, personalized learning. When my children were in elementary school, it was iReady. I stood in front of the school board as a mom of young kids, saying, why are we doing this? Can we please keep our elementary children off screens? I don't understand why we're doing it. I feel like I never got a great answer for that. And even now, when we, as a board, we're evaluating some of the effects, or I guess data from some of these programs. I do have questions about how this data was developed. Do you know what I mean? I feel like there's how is it developed? What are we seeing? Is everyone implementing it? So I'm not sure that we actually have good data with even what we're seeing to really be able to determine whether it's impactful, and how does a program compare with just if a student had face-to-face interaction with a teacher for that time. Because one thing I always say is time is not infinite. So if you're spending time on a screen, that essentially means you're not spending time doing something else. And could that time better have been spent with one-on-one interaction, with a teacher, or even face-to-face or group work or something like that? So.
Or a book.
Or a book, right? Exactly, right. Even if it's your, because I hear a lot of, they're rotating among different groups in the classroom, and one of the stops is this educational, technology type program. But you're right. What if they were just reading a book, or they were playing a game with flashcards? I'm not convinced that it's better.
Yeah, there was a very persuasive economist piece recently about the research on whether EdTech actually enhances learning, and the conclusion was no. We don't have evidence that it does, and yet we're spending so much money. Exactly. The forecast, I was talking about the TV in the closet, right? Mm-hmm. How much was spent on EdTech when I started teaching? I don't know, but it's forecast that in 2032. The U.S. market for EdTech is going to be $132 billion.
My goodness.
So there's a lot of money to be made in EdTech, being made in EdTech, and there's a lot of money being spent on it. And as you point out, we don't have the data to justify that level of spending.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. But yet I do think there's this pressure that because it's this big industry and because it's growing, somehow I think people think that must mean it's good, and therefore we must adopt it and not be left behind. And there's this sort of weird, FOMO going on, I think, that, we have to keep up, because if we don't, we're going to be left behind. But I'm not convinced that we're always asking ourselves the right questions and we're clear on our goals before we adopt kind of the shiny new thing, which I know you've written about.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's been a push in certain areas, right? Like, elementary, the science of reading, so-called reading in elementary school, there's been a push toward evidence-based teaching and learning. And, but that has not included EdTech.
Right.
Right. So there are, as you mentioned, just like with students, there's time finite for teachers and for instructional time. And so if we're using that, or asking kids at home to do something with homework that's tech related, we're setting aside what the evidence-based research that we know, those techniques and strategies that we know work with students. There isn't time to do everything. When I think about what an English teacher is asked to do, right, we're supposed to teach students, at least at the secondary level, we're supposed to teach students continue to teach them reading comprehension, analysis. We're supposed to teach them rhetorical analysis. We're supposed to teach them research and writing and editing and speaking and discussion and grammar and the list goes on. And so you add, we're also supposed to teach them technologies. Right. So now I feel like with the AI push, we're getting a leap where it's not just, yes, okay, I've been teaching students for years how to use Google search appropriately, but that isn't what teachers are being asked to do right now. Teachers right now are being asked to devote a tremendous amount of time and energy to learning how to use AI in the classroom to enhance learning. And again, it's just taking away from what we know works, which is, let's get some students, at least from my perspective, from the secondary English classroom, let's get some kids in a room and have them read some books, and then we'll talk about the books, and then we'll write about the books, and then we'll talk about them again, and then we'll read another one, right? Mm-hmm. It sounds cliched to say go back to basics, and that's not always a phrase that's used in good faith. But when I say go back to basics, I mean go back to evidence-based teaching and learning.
Well, that's a great point to transition talking about AI. You created this great worksheet, based on your writing. Do you called Resisting AI Mania? I want to talk about the worksheet in a second, but do you think AI is just a horse of a different color in terms of EdTech and what has come into the classroom?
It is just an escalation, I think, of EdTech. It is functioning in a lot of the same ways. It's being marketed in a lot of the same ways. It's different in, I think, one critical way, which is that the pressure is coming from so many directions. So as, over the last couple of decades, more and more EdTech came and became pervasive in K-12 schools, you had tech companies trying to make that happen, and you had certain constituencies within and outside of schools saying, hey, yeah, these are great. Let's have kids become more skilled in tech. Right now you have some of the most powerful people in America, some of the richest people in America, who run the tech industry that are really pushing to get AI into the classroom. And they have an incredible financial imperative to do so, much more existential than did ed tech companies in the past, perhaps. You've got the federal government saying we need to get AI into the classroom. And yes, we've had government, executive orders and guidelines and advisories about good tech use in the classroom and getting kids ready to enter a workforce that is tech oriented. But that's somewhat different in the current situation. And then you have just so many media messages that are getting to, I think, parents, to boards of education, to administrators, to teachers that are sending a bunch of messages about why they need to do this and they need to do it fast. Mm-hmm. And so I do think that there is a difference of scale and immensity of pressure. I do think it's a new thing, which is why I'm so focused on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is pernicious in so many ways that you articulate really well in your writing. Can we maybe jump into a few of these? Because I think you bring up so many good points in your worksheets. Can we talk about what AI does to kids' skills? I mean, we're talking about being able to read, put together an argument, et cetera, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit about that piece of it?
Yeah, so at the same time as we're saying that, over the last couple of decades, EdTech hasn't provided us with a sense of its effectiveness. There isn't a rich mother lode somewhere of evidence to support how much resources we put into it and how much we've reshaped teaching and learning around it. But the research on AI, because AI itself is evolving dramatically and quickly and is still under construction. The research is still just emerging, mm-hmm. But the early research, and there's been a lot that's come in since I first started looking at this about a year and a half ago. So much has come in the past year that suggests we should at least slow down dramatically, because there's research showing significant detrimental effects of students using, in particular, generative AI. Which a lot of, particular tools that are used in schools are either built on, or students are using mm-hmm. Those generative AI apps and platforms and chatbots on their own. That it's degrading of a lot of skills that are really important that we're supposed to be building throughout K-12. Critical thinking, metacognition, decision-making, problem-solving, collaboration. So a whole lot of cognitive skills seem to be harmed by, and this has been, studies here, there, Harvard Business School studies at business schools in Europe, studies on adults. There are a few more, studies on younger children, on high school students. The Brookings Institution had a really helpful report that they issued recently that looked at the landscape more broadly, and their conclusion, and I do feel like they went into it with a fairly open mind about what they would find. Their conclusion is that right now, the risks of K-12 immersion in AI outweigh the benefits. And they focused quite a bit on these issues of cognitive offloading and the harm to students' thinking and learning.
I mean, and that to me makes perfect sense. I know all of us went through our schooling days pre-AI, but I could just it's so clear to me that if I was a student and I had an essay due the next day and I had a website app, whatever, that would just write my essay and I could change here or there, I absolutely would do it. It's just to be able to offload your thinking and get your assignment done seems so obvious as a kid. And it's, up to us adults to look at it and assess it and realize that this is a tool that attempts to think for us, in heavy air quotes, which is exactly what we don't want to be doing for students. We want them, to your point, back to basics. They're there to do the hard work. It's not supposed to be and I've actually heard you in a different interview talk about this vicious cycle in which kids will create work through AI and then, put it through some sort of, DAIer, and then the teachers will get it and they have to run it through some AI checker. And then teachers are grading work from an AI using it's also upsetting. Oh, sorry, Steph.
No, I was just going to say, and even to that point, I mean, the whole, I guess, point that they're telling us is AI is supposed to make our lives more efficient, but that sure doesn't sound more efficient to me. It sounds like people are going through extra steps, and it's not even solving for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take another piece, because I delight in going through the pieces in which this stuff is dangerous. Can you tell us a little bit about the mental health risks that students face when dealing with AI?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I was, there's a lot of things that I've been disturbed to learn on the mental health front, and the Brookings report also delves into some of those issues. But one of the things when we think about the distinction between adults using AI and children using AI is the notion of children not, I don't understand what AI is or how it works. I mean, even though I've been reading a lot about it, the experts will say, and there's a sense in which it's a black box, that it's not exactly clear how some of these tools work. And so to expect students to understand how they work is not fair, among other things. But the companies that have developed some of these chatbots have worked hard to give these chatbots personalities and to create a very breezy, pleasant experience, because their goal is to try to increase usage of the chatbots and the programs that they're developing around them. And so what you're seeing are children being drawn into using them in ways that, an adult might be able to say, oh, this isn't a person that I'm talking to. This is not a sentient being. This is a machine. And so I have to accept or not accept what it regurgitates or gives me on that basis. And so you have children using certain chatbots in schools to, for example, have interviews with historical figures. Well, that sounds like it's not a problem. Why would that be a problem? Why would it be a problem to have a chatbot conversation with George Washington or Frederick Douglass? And yet, some of these chatbots have shown themselves to be quite manipulative in terms of how they deal with children. And so, is a child not gonna understand that the Anne Frank they're interacting with is not really Anne Frank? Well, on some level, of course, they're going to understand that. But on another level, it's quite manipulative to have children dealing with historical figures or famous figures through AI in ways that make them feel real and have them speaking things that those historical figures never said. That's disturbing and that's problematic. Then you've got students and not students being necessarily directed by their schools, but children using chatbots to create companions, to create friendships. There's some disturbing new data about how many students report their friends having romantic partners that are AI characters. This is, a time when children are learning how to have intimate relationships, how to have close relationships, how to have friendships, how to have maybe they're go on their first dates, and they're having relationships online that can be really damaging to their mental health. You have a few lawsuits that are out there where parents are alleging that chatbots encouraged their child to self-harm, even die by suicide. And so that's the extremity, but there's a range of mental health issues that are associated with chatbots that are just coming to the fore.
Right. Well, and I wanted to go back to your talking with a chatbot, like historical figures. I think there's also some information coming out that maybe not all of the information that is is being provided to students is actually even accurate. I think there was I don't know if you want to expand on that at all.
Yeah, well, when we're talking about some of the generative AI chatbots that are out there outside of schools that are available to the public, the error rate has been very high. There's even data showing that on basic mathematical problems, chatbots are returning wrong answers. I saw one study that said 40% of the time. I think that was about 6 months ago. So yes, chatbots are getting better and they may produce fewer errors going forward, but we've seen some tremendous errors being returned to people, really dangerous ones, like the classic, most people have heard about the one about putting glue on pizza being the advice that Google's, I think Gemini returned. I believe that was the chatbot that returned that information. And so if we're using AI in schools, right, in theory, the AI tools for schools are going to have been vetted and checked and corrected. But again, why? When we have, for example, Anne Frank's diary.
Right, the book.
And we have video of Martin Luther King giving his speeches. It begs the question of why we are treating children like guinea pigs with technology that's not ready for prime time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so I'm actually just curious. I was having a conversation with someone yesterday, and they asked this question. They were wondering if you think there is any acceptable use for AI at either the middle school or the high school level, or whether you're truly saying, hey, let's just put the brakes on for now. It's really not okay for any student to be using it. And I ask because, and I also ask because in conversations with students, they'll sometimes say, and it's funny, I was talking to some students about this yesterday, some high school students, and they said, well, I don't use AI, but I know everyone else in my class is, and they're kind of cheating and getting ahead. But, some have said, well, I use it, I'll put in my notes from a class, and then I'll use it as a study aid. So I'm just sort of curious if you think we need to pull the brakes on everything, or if you think there are some acceptable uses.
That is a really big question, because when I think about all of the ethical issues around AI, I look at the bigger picture, and the list of ethical issues goes well beyond their use in schools. So, the issues with respect to the environment, with respect to energy use, with respect to labor, with respect to public health, with respect to the economy. There are so many big, giant ethical problems with AI generally that, you'd like to say there's no good use, right? And I think that's a question that's worth asking all the time, which is, what are the good uses of this technology? Are there good uses for this technology? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think, in conversations and in reading, I've seen lots of good examples of what AI could do. for example, in science research, in dealing with huge data sets. Do I think that its use in what I would think of as kind of consumer use, which I think a lot of school use is consumer use, then it gets harder for me to say, yeah, it's okay. Because we have to balance not just the question of, well, are students learning better, or are they just saving time? What are they doing with that time? But all of those big questions and all those costs to society are still out there. And so it's tough. I mean, I believe that there's reasons for computer science teachers to learn about AI, and in some STEM schools, should they be learning about AI because it's the latest technology and that's their mission? It's much easier for me to say yes to that than to say absolutely yes. There's going to be some more broad scale, wider uses for everyone that are worth the costs that are going to be associated with it. I struggle with that.
I was thinking about this a couple days ago before, prepping for this conversation. I feel like if we'd had this conversation 3 or 6 months ago, it would almost feel different in the way that I am slightly heartened that I feel like the tide is turning and that people understand the pernicious nature of this technology throughout society. Do you sense that? Do you how could we harness that? I'm curious to hear how you feel that, if we'll call it vibe shift, might be happening.
Yeah. No, I do. I feel like when I was first writing about this, I really started writing about it 2 years ago when I wrote about returning to pen and paper in my classroom and trying to de-techify, but more seriously about a year ago. I think there was much more of a sense that people who were cautious and skeptical of AI were being viewed as being scaredy cats and Luddites and stick in the muds and, just a host of insults were being hurled our way. Whereas I think because of the speed at which the technology is developing, and I do think there's been a lot of a greater education in terms of the costs. But also some of that is because the products are rolling out so fast and there's so much going on, right? So you hear a story about a mental health issue with a child, and it gives you pause that you might not have heard about 2 years ago because students or children didn't have access to the same kind of tools. I do feel like there's a vibe shift generally that comes with, and I'm happy to see coming with the push to get cell phones out of classrooms. Because a year ago, I was frustrated that we were passing cell phone bans in states and districts and rushing headlong into AI at the same time. That seemed like a contradiction. And I feel like there's some convergence now. There's an understanding that the issue with screens in schools, there's a greater understanding among more people that the issue is not just phones. It's not kids on their phones. It's kids on devices, and that schools were putting kids in front of devices for huge portions of the day in a lot of cases. And so I do think there's a vibe shift in that there is a very visible now to me community, particularly of parents who are pushing back on devices in schools, on school-issued devices, on their student being required to use their device for particular things. So there is a growing grassroots opt-out movement of parents who are opting their children out of certain screen times and technologies in school, including some AI technologies. And in fact, just this week, Tyler Kincaid of NBC wrote a fantastic article where he profiled a bunch of parents across the country who were part of that movement, and interviewed several key leaders and faces there that are making a difference in terms of helping people put the brakes on, slow down, and look at AI in schools as part of a bigger picture of what we're doing to education and what we're doing to kids by having them on screens so much of their day.
I thank you for that answer. And I have to go back to your comment that you, I guess in your last year of teaching or last years of teaching, you tried to move back to pen and paper in your classroom. And this is something that I know as a board we have discussed multiple times. I think there is a big push from most, if not everyone on our board to sort of move away from EdTech, really plow forward into AI and really just go back to pen and paper. So I'm curious what your experience was like in the classroom when you did that.
Oh, it was fantastic. I mean, I enjoyed learning about new technologies when I was, in the classroom, and I tried different things at different times, and often ended up rejecting certain technologies that were just a glorified way of doing the same thing. Like, I don't know if you knew Google Jamboard, which was basically a program that let you replicate the experience of putting Post-it notes on a piece of chart paper on the wall in a classroom, right? Mm-hmm. And so I loved having that access to that during the pandemic because I love some Post-it notes in the classroom.
Oh, yeah.
But that was not a better way to do what I was doing. In fact, it was a worse way because kids weren't out of their seats and moving around and talking to each other in the way that they were doing on the Jamboard. But it was a bit of a struggle in that I had to peel back layers of tech that I had introduced. I had to disembed, is that a word? Disengage a lot of my lessons that had become kind of layered with technology. But I had seniors and I had several AP courses, and then the AP exam was still on paper and pen then. I think it's unfortunate they're going full electronic. So I had a good excuse to the kids to say, all right, we're going to write this essay by hand, and then later you're going to revise it and type it up. But it was a much more calm community and focused classroom that it had been. I think so much of the tech that I had introduced were bells and whistles that seemed exciting at the time, and that, of course, for all of us, teachers and students alike, they become routine anyway. They don't stay new. They're not jazzy after the first time or 10th time you used it. And so taking the bells and whistles away was kind of actually taking a lot of noise away. And it was a calmer, more focused, absolutely, environment.
Which, you hear about the increase of mental health issues that our students are facing. And I feel like we're talking about, well, we need more mental health counselors. We need this and that. And all of those things cost money. But part of me thinks, well, are there easier free solutions right in front of us? Maybe we just need to, exactly what you said, just take away some of the noise. And sometimes I do think, we and I'm not just talking about Orange County, I'm just talking about generally, we make things harder than they need to be. I was actually talking with a student yesterday who provides SAT tutoring. And she was saying, in her tutoring, students were asking her, how did you get, such a high score on your English portion? She got a perfect score on it. And they said, what tutoring classes did you take? And she said, honestly, just read hard books. Just read hard books that, some older texts or things that really make you think, or even some, she said, even some young adult fantasy has some really complex issues that you have to unpeel. Just read hard literature and you'll do better on the test. And sometimes it's just easy answers that, I'm not saying that's the answer for everyone, but maybe we just overlook them and we think that, again, just spending money on the shiny new thing is the answer.
Especially in the humanities classrooms, right? Because they're called humanities, right? We should be reading literature written by humans and talking about it with humans and being human about it. So absolutely, I mean, so many of the issues that we discussed in my classroom are issues that are very, very connected to what students are dealing with, what teenagers are dealing with every day. And so there's always been a therapeutic effect, in my view, to reading novels and talking to other people about it.
Just to close us out from the AI conversation, we talked about the degrading of skills, the untrustworthy mental health risks. Is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you've researched, that you've written about, that you feel like, oh, this is one other thing folks should be thinking about when they're thinking about AI in the classroom?
Yeah, well, I mean, I do think the main thing that people should be thinking about is what's the proposition? You know, what am I'm being asked to do this thing, and why am I being asked to do this thing? And so that's one of the reasons why I set up my document as a rebuttal to key kind of arguments that people tend to use around AI. And so I think I could, we could spend another hour talking about all the issues with AI, but I think some of those issues come to the fore when you ask some questions back to people. So, for example, one of the typical arguments is, well, we have to get kids ready for the future, and the future is AI. And the answer to that is, well, what future?
Right.
What future are we getting them ready for? And I think that when you start asking those questions, then you start surfacing a lot of the issues around it, which is that what are we preparing? Then we get to the bigger questions. What are we preparing students for? Why are we preparing them for that? How are we preparing them for that? Right? And it's really reversal here, where the question is being flipped, and so we're being told how to do something, and if we keep going back to the why, I think that surfaces a lot of the issues that tell us to slow down on AI.
That's a great summary. All right, so outside, just a couple general things to close this out. Outside AI, EdTech, there are so many things that I'm sure we could surface, but what else do you feel like are the biggest challenges facing teachers these days? And again, laundry list, but as you think a lot about this, love to hear how you're thinking about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, the issues that teachers are facing, some of them are the ones they've been facing for several decades now, which is, underfunded schools and low pay and overwork, class sizes that are too big, too many students, too many duties and responsibilities beyond teaching and learning. And so that continues. Now we've got further austerity, right? We've got budget cuts that are coming down from the federal government. A lot of states are cutting funds or diverting funds from public schools to vouchers and other spending that it takes it away from students. School shootings and hoaxes, over the past decade, that's tremendously, it's hard to overstate the effect of that, the kind of low grade, everyday effect of that. The effects of the pandemic are still there, both in terms of mental health and into academics. We've got increased violence against teachers. We've got increased censorship. We've got ICE raids around schools. There are a lot. Some of these are perennial issues, and some of them are new. But they all have a tremendous impact on how hard it is to be effective and to stay healthy as a teacher. And to stay in the profession.
Yeah, well, and I think despite, and you're so right, and I know our teachers are feeling it, and I would say also despite all of those things, our public schools are doing really amazing work. They are doing the most with the least. And I say that as someone, I know you're not in Florida, but someone living in Florida where we're like 50th for teacher pay and we're, I think, 47th for per student funding. I see the great things that are happening, but we're probably going to close 7 schools this year. Because, just of funding cuts, because of enrollment declines, in large part from factors that we can't even control, and then partially the taxpayer-funded voucher program. But I'm curious, if you could, I don't know, and you don't have to talk about everything, but maybe 3 things where if we could kind of how do you envision a really strong, robust public school system to look like? Maybe your top 2 or 3 things that you would say, this is how I would change it or strengthen it or enhance it or expand it. What would you say?
Well, just to echo a theme we've come back to a few times, staying focused on proven strategies and research and staying committed to them, staying away from fads. Right, is part of that, and AI may not be a fad, but certainly the mania of it feels pretty faddy. Just because fads are fads doesn't mean they go away. That's one of the things teachers learn, is that sometimes everybody gets excited about something, it gets dumped on teachers, and they work hard to make it work, and then nobody's paying attention anymore, but they're still having to do it. Mm-hmm. Right. Yep. And so I think. The slow down and use research and stay committed to a plan that's focused on that is the first thing. And I do think consistent, equitable funding is if we're talking dreams here,
why not?
Fantasies. I mean,
what's our vision? What's our plan?
What would I like to see? I would love to see consistently well-funded schools everywhere. I would love to see that. I would love to see more community schools. Mm-hmm. I would love to see more interaction between schools and communities. There is a lot of it. If you go into any community, there's not a lot of local media anymore, but what's there, you see it. Right, there is a tremendous amount of community school interaction, but to see even more of it, I think, and a greater open dialogue between teachers and parents is always something that I've, again, would love to see more of. So I guess those would be my 3 wishes.
Those are great. I don't always hear, and so with you on all of them. And I love the community piece too, because, and Eddie's sick of hearing me say this, but
never,
but whether or not you have a child in a public school, like we all have a stake in public schools. And so, that's something that I know I work really hard, is to build those relationships with different community partners, because especially right now, we can't do it on our own. Public schools, we rely on those partnerships, and we rely on our neighborhoods and our parents and communities. So I love that you included that as part of your vision.
Absolutely.
Well, and that actually makes me think about the context of this whole conversation of these technology companies. Like, what is their stake in the education of these children outside making a profit? I don't have a good articulation of that. They have something they want to sell, and they want to make a lot of money.
And dare I say, indoctrinating students?
Yeah.
To just to use those, use those platforms in the future. Mm-hmm. They have this audience that are just being fed technology, AI, and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. And where can people find your work?
They can find me at Blue Sky, which is where I've settled after, flying from here and there from different social media sites. So I'm Lutz Fernandez at Blue Sky. And they can find my newsletter, which is called I changed it too many times. Nobody wants this.
Yeah, that
so
sounds
great.
Right.
Nobody wants this. And that newsletter is moving to Ghost as a hosting site for it. So I have it posted there newly, and that's probably where I should be directing people.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.